Welcome to this week's 2 Men in the Middle. See, I already goofed that up. We'll just pause for a minute there and go. For some reason, saying the word politics and middle for me, very, very difficult. Welcome to this week's 2 Men in the Middle. I'm Craig Huey.
I'm Brandon Kinnig.
And I'm Jason Peterson.
So you may have already wondered, or already kind of figured out something's different than most weeks of 2 Men in the Middle. We've added a third. Jason Peterson, welcome and thanks for coming.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So we are actually working on a little plan to expand our podcast empire, where we've added Jason to the mix. Jason, we all used to work together. We've all had kind of political conversations at work, and we think Jason's going to fit in to what we're trying to do and kind of the style of the podcast very well. So you're going to be hearing more of him. You're going to be hearing more of Mike. We're going to start a second podcast. That's going to be more of a season approach, where we take one concept and try to actually drive down to some truth and actually work it together with the audience to see if we can actually figure out what's in our fact base right now from a political and cultural perspective. Where are the actual truths out there? And this is a good podcast where once a week we get together and kind of review the news and what's happening in our world. I think we were going to take a different tact with our second podcast, where we're going to try to actually dive into one topic and see how far we can get. So you're going to hear more about that. You're going to hear more from Mike and Jason and Brandon and myself as we kind of try to bring some different perspectives and keep this thing fresh and interesting. So that's what we're going to attempt to do. Follow along and listen to us, because we may pull this off. We may not. It's like everything in amateur podcasting. You start with one direction and you see what happens.
Well, fun trying.
Hey, but if you're not evolving, you're dying.
There you go. We attribute a lot of our failures here, Jason, to amateur podcasting. It's just kind of a catch-all for anything that we do wrong. So last week I was actually out of town. We did some remote stuff around the election. Brandon, we're election plus week and a half now. 10?
Yeah.
Plus 10?
I lose track of the days. They blur together now.
that seems very bizarre. Where are we? Give me your sense for where we're at in the whole election process right now with Trump and conceding. I don't think anybody thinks he's going to come out and give the grand concession speech, but where are we at with this whole process working out?
Well, I mean, we're in a wait and see mode, and unfortunately, Trump holds the levers because he has influence over those in his administration. You have the refusal of the GSA to partner with the Biden administration to start giving them access so that they can start the transition. You have the inability of Biden to have access to national security briefings and intelligence briefings, which is also an even greater issue because of the national security component and the fact that we're in a very, I think, challenging time, because this period between the election and before Inauguration Day is a period that our adversaries can exploit. So you have electrical grids that can be hacked, information systems, and the lack of continuity and the lack of transition integration makes it more likely that something like that can happen. But everybody's afraid to stand up to Trump. So you have the Secretary of State who's refusing to even call Biden president-elect, as most of these people are, and who made a statement that, about the second term of the Trump administration. So they're living in this alternate reality because nobody wants to piss off the orange man, essentially.
I think Pompeo came out and said that was just a joke.
Yeah.
He didn't mean that.
But I think it plays into a greater context of that there isn't this definitive acknowledgement by the president that he lost, that a transition needs to happen. And they're forging ahead with these lawsuits, which aren't going to go anywhere. But I predict that it will take all of these lawsuits being thrown out before there is that acknowledgement and we move into that reality. I've heard rumblings by that staffers close to the president have said that he knows the time is up and that probably many of these lawsuits aren't going anywhere, but he's dangling them out there. And again, he's thinking about his longevity and his legacy in terms of being able to parlay this into an idea that he did not lose, that there was fraud, and milk it for his next venture post-presidency.
Jason, do you think Trump will ever come out and just admit he lost this election?
I don't think so.
No.
This is one of the biggest challenges too, because besides tactically just the effort that Biden needs to put in over the next couple of months planning for his administration, the other piece of this is the philosophical side, the peaceful transition of power. So such a core tenet of our country. The whole world's watching. How does this happen? And I think we've seen the maturity level of our president, and it doesn't look good for how this goes So we really need the rest of the Republicans to stand up and once the official numbers are tallied, we can wait for that, I guess, and then get in line and help and promote the peaceful transition of power.
So do you think that's going to happen? Do you think we'll come a point where Republicans will fall in line? And if so, what's it going to take to get there?
I do. I think at some point they'll look at their own potential for re-election and how they can work with the Biden administration and foreign leaders. And once the numbers are in, fully tallied, and there'll always be a subset of the people who don't believe those. But once the math's on the table, I think that they'll see their better side.
Yeah, I agree.
Now, it'll be challenging to convince Trump of that. I don't see somebody walking him out of the office at some point when he doesn't have any support from his peers. He'll go.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think a key date is certification. When many of these states certify their results, I think that might be the time when you start to see more Republicans acknowledge Biden as president-elect, more pressure on the administration to start the transition process. So I think that's going to be a key indicator of kind of where we go from here. And Michael Cohen actually said something, and again, I don't know if this has any likelihood of occurring, but his thought is that the president will leave for Mar-a-Lago during the holidays and just won't come back to the White House. That will be how he approaches the change, and there will still be no acknowledgement of a loss, no concession, nothing, no formal statement. He will not attend the inauguration, which I don't think he will, because in his mind, if he attends, he knows that eyes and ears will be focused on him as a loser, and he cannot stand to not be in the limelight as a winner.
Are there Republicans you're watching, Brandon, that have kind of a tell that when this person comes out and says something, that will be impactful, and that kind of represents a new stage of Trump's acceptance of what's going to happen?
Yeah, I think if you're like in the Senate specifically, like Senate Republicans, because there's been several Republicans that are not in the House or Senate that have spoken out, but I don't think they have as much relevancy as those that are in office right now. Who are going to be working with the incoming administration. But I would say that if you're looking at particularly the senators of some of these states that are very close, where there are recounts happening and there's been the lawsuits occurring. So looking at Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania, looking at probably Wisconsin. Yeah. Those are states where the voices are going to matter more so than other states in terms of being able to kind of settle this once and for all. Yeah. I don't give any, Georgia's senators do not count because they're up for re-election. So they are going to continue to, parrot Trump's talking points to suit themselves in their races.
Well, there should be a selfish aspect to this too, right? The senators who want to see a future of their political career and maybe have a chance at the presidency or some other cabinet position themselves in the future, they'll need to get in line.
So this is a good point. Don Jr. came out strong and said, hey, all 2024 hopefuls, if you're not out there ride or die with my dad, you basically just screwed yourself for 2024. Do you think that's true? And if so,
opposite advice of what they should get.
That sounds logical. How much damage are people doing to themselves right now, do you think?
Well, I think right now there's an element of the country loves the drama, which is a shame because it's so important. I think that people come to their senses. Like I said, they'll go the right way. It's just going to take some time, and they'll get cover from the court cases being dismissed, from the official counts coming in. That's their cover. So
you think once some of that plays out, cooler heads prevail, reality sets in?
Just like Democrats align behind Biden early on, then you'll see them all line up together.
Damn.
You don't want to be one of the 20 that are sitting behind still not agreeing to it.
So I listen to more conservative media than anybody here. And I think, Brandon, what I'm hearing a lot on the conservative side is, hey, this is a process. Nothing's official till the states actually certified their results. What do you think of it's a process argument for the tack the president is taking right now with not conceding this election?
Well, I mean, it's ironic and laughable, right? Because if you flash back to 2016, the president had closer margins in some of these must-win states and had a much closer victory. And there was no talk about, let the process play out. He was projected as the winner on election night, and he went along with that. There weren't any, calls to, wait for all the votes to be counted. Let's make sure every legal vote gets counted. So this whole narrative that has been created now is basically, I see it as a coping mechanism, because the base is demoralized. They don't want to accept that their guy lost. And this is a way to cope with it. If they can live in this alternate reality, it makes the loss easier to bear in many ways. So that's where we're at.
Did anybody see Saturday Night Live last weekend? Dave Chappelle was on it.
I watched that last 2-minute clip, I think, of his, which was really, really good.
He did his comedy routine, but at the very end, he said something that I thought was really striking. It just relates to what you said. He said, do you remember how you felt in 2016 at the end of that election? Tonight, 50% of the country still feels that way.
Yeah.
And that's incredible. And that's one of the things that I think Democratic Party as a whole, and even us specifically, need to spend some time on, is reflection. What are we missing with the other half of the country? Trump earned more votes than he did last time, right? And there was greater turnout, so some people are calling it that. But I think if you believe the polls, which there's another topic, and
we're going to talk about that.
The trends, it looked like there was going to be this blue wave, and even if it was a split voting ticket, people would have looked at the last 4 years and judged Trump and voted accordingly, and that didn't happen. And so if we want to ever come to a place in the future where we have more than a 50-50, more than the polarization we have now, we need to understand why that was. And I haven't seen too much analysis of that in the media yet. Well, we're still looking at the numbers.
You're right. That blue wave didn't materialize. And what Democrats need to ask themselves, too, is obviously there was a divergence. Biden was able to receive more votes top of ticket than many who were running, for Congress on the same ticket. And even state by state, you see these Senate challengers and House incumbents in some cases fall short when Biden was able to pull out bigger numbers. And so that's the question needs to be asked, too. What was Biden able to do that they were not? So you can take that a couple of different ways. One, that this was just a reflection on Trump himself. And so, it was a turnout election, people voting against Trump. Trump was able to get his base out. At the same time, I don't think, so Biden's win, this election night was so bizarre, right? Because we went into it, most people fell asleep thinking that Biden had lost, or if he pulled out a win, that this was barely a win. Now that the dust has settled, he has won by 5 million plus votes and counting, which is not
more than 2016.
More than 2016. 51% of the vote. Hillary had a plurality. She did not achieve the over 50% because of the third party component, which is significant in terms of being able to pull that out. It's very rare for an incumbent to lose. And in fact, for the margin and percentage of victory, you have to go back to FDR beating Hoover to arrive at 51%, and the difference of the vote between them. So very significant. And the fact that Biden picked up 5 states that Hillary lost, Trump picked up none on the Republican side. And then one of those states, Michigan, too, which is interesting. Most of the states flipped by margins very similar to how Trump flipped them in 2016. Like Pennsylvania, Biden won it by 77,000, which is about the amount that Trump won it in 2016. Same in Wisconsin, about 10,000 votes. But the interesting thing is Michigan flipped completely. They went from plus 10,000 votes for Trump in 2016 to plus 150,000 for Biden, a 3-point margin. So he was able to really bring Michigan back into the Democratic column, of course. And then you have Georgia and Arizona being added too, which are just, icing on the cake, and getting at 306 electoral votes, which was what Trump had and what he considered a landslide.
Why has Arizona been called by some of the media outlets and not others? Versus Georgia, that has not almost universally.
Yeah.
So this is interesting. So if you believe the Republican conspiracy theory, this was a plot by Fox News to hurt President Trump. And I usually don't believe in conspiracies, and we don't do a lot of conspiracy talk here. But when the final vote comes in, he's probably going to win that by less than 12,000 votes. I have to agree.
Biden will.
That they were a little quick on the trigger to call that. Brandon, you've been around campaigns and stuff. Is there any Is there any foundation to the theory that Fox News particular by the call of Arizona early was trying to disenfranchise Republican voters?
No, because again, people realize that at Fox News, as it is in many of these networks, their decision desk is a separate entity from the rest of the news business. They are not, and people have spoken about this. So the people that make those calls are experts. They don't, respond or feed up into management at Fox as others do, and they have more independence, more autonomy. So they do not have to answer to anybody at Fox to make those calls. And this happened in 2016 at Fox too. Fox called some states early.
Remember in 2012 when Megyn Kelly broke into the decision desk because Karl Rove thought they had called Ohio wrong?
I do. Yep. And so they got pushback just as they did to last week from some of their on-air personalities and some of their guest pundits, for calling some of these states too early. So this is more of a trend with Fox. They tend to just be more, it's not really political as much as they just tend to be more out there with their calls on some of these states before some of the other networks. You can argue that it's ratings driven, but it's not, knowing how they've done this in the past, and it hasn't really fallen along left or right spectrum. It's more just a combination of they just feel more confident and
so you're not on the conspiracy bandwagon that Fox is purposefully trying to.
There's no evidence at all to indicate that.
The AP called Arizona too, though, and they've never been wrong. Correct?
Yeah, that is correct. And you could argue too that even if it were to narrow, that they were able to read where those outstanding votes were. Yeah. And I think even now, if you're looking at today where the outstanding votes are left, I think they're only in Maricopa and Pima counties today. So some of that will favor Trump, but Pima County, that will favor Biden. So I think they made the call based on where they knew those outstanding votes could be tabulated.
These folks generally know what they're doing, and they're not going to make a call that's going to be reversed later and have them kind of take that credibility hit.
Because we really haven't, I don't think, had that happen since the year 2000. No. And so the networks have been very careful. Most of them prior to 2000 didn't have in-house experts and mathematicians doing this work, and they do now. And they all are very cautious for the most part in terms of calling states. But yeah, that was an interesting tidbit of the night because it was ironic on many levels and then also counterintuitive that of all the networks, because CNN did not call Arizona, but Fox News did.
Yeah. So JP, how much of what's happening right now, Trump's reaction, is rooted in the last 4 years of Democrats basically saying he is an illegitimate president due to Russia collusion? How much of this is residual? I guess the question I'm asking is, how much of this have we brought on ourselves? And how much of this do we just need to sit and let pass, knowing that, hey, we kind of planted this field and we've been stoking it for 4 years. Some of this has to be expected.
Well, nobody should be surprised by Trump's reaction right now. And we saw day one of his election in 2016. I mean, back to when he looked at the crowd sizes of the inauguration ceremony and said they were wrong. Yeah. The man doesn't look at numbers the same way the rest of us do. Now, I think maybe what's just as interesting, though, is the other half of the country, the 50% who voted for him and he didn't win, and they're looking at this as a test of the whole system right now. Where are they getting their information? What math are they looking at? And should we be nervous that they're not seeing the same thing that those of us who are reading the AP or Fox News are?
Yeah. Do you think any of Trump's supporters legitimately think he's going to overturn this election and win? Or is this more just reinforcing his brand as a fighter to set himself up with whatever he wants to do next?
I think as long as there is ambiguity from the rest of political leadership, they see there's a potential for it to be overthrown, which is why these court cases being dismissed are important, which is why other senators standing up and saying, Vice President-elect.
Yeah.
I completely agree with you because I've interacted with a few of his supporters on Facebook, and I was interacting with a woman the other day saying, oh no, he won Pennsylvania. And I'm like, well, where's the evidence? And she's like, you just watch within the next 7 to 10 days, once the court cases are litigated, the real vote count's going to come out. He'll have won Pennsylvania, and went on this whole tirade. And then when I ask about examples of fraud, they can never say, and they're like, oh, there's all these affidavits. Like they've been turned in. You just wait and see. Like it's,
and you've been following some of these court court cases. I've been following some folks on Twitter. These seem to be breaking down very, very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, no, and some of the opinions are pretty direct in terms of saying that this is a waste of the court's time.
Yeah.
There hasn't been evidence provided. I read the opinion most recently, I believe, in the Michigan case, and it was fascinating to read the judge just completely throw cold water on that and say, you brought no evidence, this is all hearsay. There's nothing legitimate here.
Nevada's already pretty much shut down too, I heard.
Yeah. And the Trump attorneys have actually withdrawn their challenges in Nevada.
Yeah.
So that's one less state. Yeah.
The Washington Post had an article that did some analysis on the filings themselves. And the filings themselves often admit that there were Republican poll watchers at the poll. And then they looked at some of the specific complaints that came out of sound volume of the PA system and dirty looks from other people in the poll workers. I mean, they don't look serious on the surface. So hopefully once they get through to a judge, whichever political bent that judge has, they'll look at it and see.
That'll be key, is breaking through the noise. There's also a Republican Philadelphia election commissioner who's been very outspoken and said, hey, I was there, I was watching the counting. These are all legitimate votes. There was nothing untoward, nothing that would be unsettling. And he's like, I really don't understand why this continues to be perpetuated. And then you have the USPS guy who recanted, who came out and said that, and you're going to have that too. You also have, I think, organizations who are doing damage, I think, to our democracy, who are offering like $1 million cash rewards for anybody to come forward. That's only going to invite those that are not in the right frame of mind to just lob accusations without any evidence. And the problem is, if you are going to be incentivizing to that degree, you're going to continue to perpetuate this.
Now, I think this part of the election is normal. It typically takes 2 to 3 weeks for everybody to get their votes and certified. I still can't understand how in the hell can we only have 99% counted in like Arizona?
Well,
what
Arizona,
are they still counting?
I found Arizona so frustrating. The fact that they only count so many ballots per day, and every single day it's like, oh, here's a few more, but there's still more coming to. Like, oh my gosh! But it was like that. I forgot in 2018 because there was that close race, but with Kristen Sinema, and she ended up winning in the end. But I remember that took like 3 weeks before all the votes were counted.
Does anybody know how many of these are digital votes? I mean, you go to the Johnson County ballot office and there's something counting in the back end. They're not hand looking at hand chads and counting pieces of paper anymore. Like, why does it take as long now as it did in 2008 or 2000 to count? I don't understand that part.
I get Pennsylvania with the mail-in ballots because you have to take the ballot out, you have to compare signatures, you have to flatten it, you have to run it, at least there. And they've not dealt with this level of mail-in ballot. That makes sense. Nevada and Arizona, which just seem to be, we'll count 2,000 a day and that's it. I don't understand that.
And Arizona, more of their population votes by mail generally, so they've had that as a facet of their voting system for a long time. But by the same token, to me, they should have a process in place to make it much more quick. And the fact that it still takes this long, despite the fact that they've had vote by mail in place for so many years, that's what I don't understand. It should, I mean, in Johnson County, like, we scan those ballots, and the first thing on election night, that the first results that come in are the mail ballots, and that's what we receive first.
And the rules differ state by state, whether those mail-in ballots can be counted ahead of time, correct?
Yeah.
They do, and that's what was so frustrating, because the states that mattered most this time around had Republican legislatures that did not allow those ballots to be pre-sorted and counted as they arrived, like they are in Florida, like they are here. So people are like, well, how was Florida able to count all their votes as quickly as they did? See, that's why it's a conspiracy.
Yeah.
Because in Pennsylvania, they were waiting. No, they weren't waiting. They were prevented by this legislature from being able to do that, as they were in Wisconsin, as they were in Michigan. It just so happens that those states have Republican legislatures and don't allow this.
And I guess what I've learned is that there's a certain amount of fraud that happens in any election. 145 million people took an action. There's bound to be some that did it incorrectly, or some that just did it wrong, and some that flat out did it fraudulently. But there's absolutely no evidence that it's at scale.
It was
to change
mass scale.
Anything.
14,000 votes in Georgia. Those
you're not changing.
No, and recounts don't really change vote totals at all. The research out there shows that at most, looking at all of the recounts over the past, I think, 40 years plus, that it changes, I think, 0.0002% of the ballots, which is a minuscule amount. But the one conspiracy theory that really made ripples last week, and I don't know if you guys saw this spreading on social media like wildfire, people were going to the Michigan state elections website and making ballot requests and names of people who had died or Mickey Mouse. And they're like, see, look at this. You can actually, vote, as a dead person. And so I spent too much time shooting down a lot of those by saying this is a ballot request system. This does
Did
not
you do this on Facebook again?
Yes. This does not mean you get a ballot. Yeah, it's you can, if you were doing that by paper or in person, you could submit under a false name, but that's why they have checks in place so they can verify your identity, and they check it based on records they have.
Yeah.
So anybody can go online and say, I want a ballot as Mickey Mouse born in, 1885. That doesn't mean you're going to get a ballot and be able to vote. And so it's just like, where's the logic, people? Come on.
What's your success rate at persuasion here?
Not good.
If you follow Brendan on Facebook, these are some of my favorite posts because I see them. I'm like, don't do it. Don't do it. Like, you already did it. And it's just, usually you average probably a good 40 to 50 responses in that thread before you go.
It never fails. Like, I always have to respond back. I'm like, maybe this time. No, that never happens.
And Jason, you brought this up that this whole process, because it goes on for 3 weeks, because 150 million individual transaction happen and fraud just happens in this process, that creates this sliver of reality that Trump seems to be just exploding out into the ether. And once it's there, what do? You can't deny that fraud hasn't taken place. It's a nuanced argument about the level of fraud that a lot of people are not going to follow.
And most people don't pay attention to the statistics. They're not statisticians. I mean, having to explain the math is extremely difficult to even people who geek out on this stuff like I do.
I don't know if you know this, but we do not do math on this podcast.
No. Well, and speaking of math, the one that just boggles my mind is all of these people who point to Pennsylvania and said, well, Trump had this lead and it just evaporated and now there's this huge deficit. And I was like, well, Pennsylvania is one of the states that releases statistics on mail ballot requests by party affiliation. So I was monitoring this because I geek out on the numbers, a month before Election Day. And I saw the breakdown in terms of those requests being made was 66% Democrats requesting mail ballots, and then 23% Republican, and then the rest was unaffiliated. So by those numbers alone, I'm like, well, clearly, you have this phenomenon where Democrats are voting by mail or, applying to vote by mail, and Republicans are hewing to President Trump's line of thinking it's fraudulent. And so by those numbers alone, when you have over 50% of the electorate vote by mail and you have the breakdown 66% Dem, 23% R, well, of course, when those come in later after election night, they're going to break much more heavily, and you're going to see the results change wildly. But again, trying to explain that to people, you can't do that in like 30 seconds, and so it doesn't work.
But this is highlighting part of the issue here, which is we have so many social norms around how this works.
Yeah.
And we have so much history about how this works. And if you can't trust the results because you don't either respect the government or the authority figure that's telling you that the count is accurate, what's the alternative? There isn't a way to convince somebody that. So you have to hope that cooler heads prevail, and the vast majority of the people do respect that.
It gets back to your point, Jason. That's why it's so incumbent upon these leaders in the party to step up sooner rather than later to shoot this down, because that's the only way that you're going to get through the noise of all of the far right conspiracy nonsense online.
You need a very loud voice there to counteract it.
Yeah, I still have hope that our 200 and some odd years of peaceful transition of power and norms and decency will prevail. And I think people are going to give Trump his week and a half of run, but eventually this transition's going to happen. And he knows that as well.
There's a reason why people are pessimistic right now. It's a tough time. I mean, it's been a crazy year. There's so many reasons for people to be upset and
this
skeptical.
Is the last thing in a big line of nut job this year. I still go back to Trump's businesses are failing. He has to have hundreds of millions of dollars, and he has to have it now. Trump is a narcissist, but he's not stupid. He knows he's going to have to raise money. He knows there are no banks in the world. There's no VC company that's going to touch him. The only thing he can monetize is his political base.
And he speaking circuit.
And he will come
Trump
right
TV.
Up to the point, but he will not throw that away. Let's wrap up our election talk about what's a mandate. Is the concept of a mandate, is that still around? Does it mean anything? Does the number of votes you get dictate your governing style? Or after Trump, is it all rules are off and it can be done, it will be done?
Well, I mean, you could argue, Trump did not win the popular vote. He did, at all, under 50%. If anybody didn't have a mandate in 2016, it was him, but he operated as if he had a mandate.
Yeah.
So it didn't really matter. The last time I think back to 2000 election, there was a lot of talk about President George W. Bush not having a mandate because of how close that election turned out. And I think that was the narrative until 9/11 happened. And then 9/11, he did have a mandate after that because, external events had an impact. You had prognosticators on the networks talking about mandates on election night. So that's why it probably has some relevancy, the fact that people keep going back to it. I do think Biden is able to say, look, beating an incumbent, and this is where if I was his spin doctors, I would focus on this. Beating an incumbent is incredibly difficult. We like to pretend it isn't, but it's only happened a couple times in our 225 plus year history. And most of the other times it's happened, it's been by a sliver of a margin under 50% of the vote. And so what Biden did today has it been done since FDR. So you got to give him his due for that. And I think that is a mandate. The problem is that argument gets diluted a little bit because of the closeness of the Senate and the fact that he won't have all three branches, which is also something unique because we haven't had a Democrat come into the presidency without having control of both branches in well over 100 years. Yeah. So, but I think a win is a win, and a win over 50%. When you get to that, I think 50% plus number, there's a lot of symbolism behind that. And that was something Trump never had. And, that was something that George W. Bush didn't have his first time around. And if you remember when George W. Bush won re-election in 2004 with 51% exactly, there was a lot more talk of the mandate then because he had achieved that. So I don't think you can understate the symbolism.
It does seem like a word from a bygone era, along with compromise. You can't imagine a president
bipartisan,
winning 60% of the popular vote and going in front of Congress and laying out what they need to do and say, I've got the country behind me.
And McConnell's like, sweet. Yeah. Let's get that done.
Now it'll all be legislated through executive action.
Yeah. So you think that's a norm that we've just blown past and it's just not relevant.
Yes.
Should that be? Should the manner and the size in which you win the presidency impact your governing style and philosophy?
I think by the definition of the word, if you feel like you have a mandate, you've got such a significant majority of the population behind you that you have a moral driver to do what you said you were going to do because they pulled the lever knowing that you were going to do that. And then if you're in front of a legislative body saying, I'm going to execute the will of the people, yes, I miss that. I think that should be something that exists.
So I like that correlation to mandate gives you kind of that moral authority. I can say these things with more weight because I had so much support behind me. Isn't that what Trump's using? That, hey, 73 million people voted for me, the most a president ever has gotten. He leaves out the fact that he lost. How much of that is relevant to not this weird transition plan he's trying to pull off, but how much of that will impact the Biden presidency?
Well, I think it's relevant from the standpoint of understanding the psyche of the American people and the fact that the idea that somehow Trump had topped out in 2016 was clearly not the case. There were more voters out there to be had, and the Republican Party, I think, was right, the Trump campaign really, when they said that they were registering all these new voters. I had some skepticism, but they did, and they got them to turn out. And so clearly this country is divided. What I think it does say is that, yes, I think Biden has a mandate, but that mandate only goes so far. So I don't think the country, with as split as it is, was voting in support of all of these big progressive policy aims. And that's what Biden has to tread carefully on. Many of the Senate and House candidates who were caught up in, the mantra on Supreme Court expansion, on Green New Deal, on some of the issues around police defunding, all of these issues that came to the surface during this race. Many of them lost their races. So there is a dichotomy there, and there's already that internal fight breaking out in the Democratic Party. Which direction do we go? And you have the moderates who are saying, hey, we need to be very cautious here and tread carefully. So, this was an election, I believe, came down to a repudiation of Donald Trump, more so than any other progressive policy aim. This was not an election about big ideas. It was rather, you want 4 more years of what we've seen or not. And 48% of the country did say, we want 4 more years. We like what we've seen the last 4 years. There's no denying that. And I've always said, in a different era, you would have, more than 40% of the country say yes to that, but that's not where we are. So I think part of that is understanding that, and part of it is being able to find a manner to move forward to be able to accomplish something, knowing that you've had almost half the country say, we don't want you.
Yeah.
So moving forward, mandate or not, what does Biden do the first 90 days? What do you guys think? How does he reach that other 48, 49, almost 50% of the country? Is this his chance to try to bridge the gap to bring everybody along with it? Or does he go straight down the liberal side and vote with that side?
Yeah, I don't see him going straight down the liberal side. I mean, he by nature is a deal maker. I mean, he's been, in the Senate for decades. His nature is to work across the aisle. The legislation that he has been successful putting forward has always been with Republican lawmakers as well as Democrat. So I think that he will be, from day one, first of all, 100% focused on the pandemic and trying to set himself apart from Trump and taking it seriously, understanding the gravity and the impact it's having across the country. And then along with that, wrapped up in that is working to get another round of stimulus out and being able to help those that are impacted.
Just let me ask it this way. What does that 48% of the country want? If Biden said, you are my number one priority, Trump voters, and I am going to dedicate my first 100 days when I've got the most cachet in this office to your needs.
I'm going to repeat an old phrase. It's the economy, stupid. I mean, Democrats are talking about police brutality, fracking, the environment, healthcare. And if you are looking for your next job, your next paycheck, your next meal on a plate, on housing of your family, you're not thinking about any of that stuff. And in a time of COVID, in a time when so many people have lost jobs and economic times are uncertain, I think that's the message that people need to hang on. And that's that. If Biden's smart, that's one that's universal. Both sides can focus on it. So whether it's a stimulus bill, maybe you don't call it a stimulus bill, some way to help people navigate not just COVID, but the job losses that came with it, and that huge percentage of the population that's worried about my next paycheck.
So just those blue-collar traditional messages that Democrats have really won on since the inception of that party, they just got to get back to.
And they don't talk about it much anymore.
Yeah.
Let's end with the election with this. Was this a win for centrist? Is being a centrist going to come back into style?
I'm going to say no, because if it were, we would see a better than 50-50 split here.
That's probably true.
What do you think?
Yeah, I would like for it, but I don't see anything on the horizon. If you look at the composition of the House members, specifically who lost versus those who didn't, there isn't, some centrists lost, some won. There isn't a clear signal that most, that the country supported centrist Democrats versus progressives. So I think that it just, I don't see anything in the psyche that reflects that we are at a time when people want us to come together and focus.
Yeah,
I think each side is still dug in, on its own. And so as bad as this sounds, if a pandemic can't bring the country together and can't bring centrism to light, what will?
Yeah,
that's well
Because
said.
I keep thinking it would be an external factor. 9/11 was one of those that brought the country together. But I don't see that happening again. It would take something outside of politics. And then even then, I don't even know if it could happen.
So as we switch topics, Jason, this is your first time in the Two Men in the Middle studio. We tried to tell you it was like in the high 90s here. And I see halfway or through our first segment, you've already started shedding clothes. Yeah.
And I'm listening to some nice rock music behind us.
You'll also notice that right next to the 2 Minute in the Middle studio, which is an office in Johnson County, by the way, is right next to the School of Rock, and they are at it tonight. Usually they're not that boisterous, but they are going. I hope our new
BPM. Keep us going.
I hope our new equipment doesn't pick up that sound. Probably not. But if it is, it's just a background. Let's sip topics to the media. The media has been a punching bag for a while. The media has become kind of the lazy pundits mainstay. If you listen to Greg Gutfeld and Jesse Waters, it's just a constant drumbeat that the major problem with politics and culture right now is the media. The media absolutely, I think, just beclowned itself the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday of this election. The not calling things, the calling things too soon. They were obviously pandering to Trump. Whatever credibility the media has, to me, they completely lost it in this election. Brandon, what's your overall reaction to how the media kind of presented themselves and presented this election to the American people last week?
Well, again, this shouldn't have been too difficult. The template for how to handle election night was there, because for months now, we've had this refrain of this is going to be a very different election. Americans are voting differently, which means election night is going to occur differently. Like, we cannot expect the same type of process where the results flow out and we know who the president is by midnight. That's just not going to happen this year. So we heard that again and again and again, and yet it was like the media, for the most part, forgot all about that and reverted back to traditional election nights. And really, they had a responsibility to remind their viewers throughout the night that, hey, we should jump to conclusions. There's 50% outstanding ballots here in Pennsylvania. There's 60% here in Michigan because of mail ballots, and because of the way this is done, those have not been counted yet and can't be counted until the coming days. So they could have easily set the tone for what was to come, and I think probably kept everybody calm rather than on the edge of their seats, because inevitably, I'm somebody who follows this and knew all this beforehand, but then I'm watching election night and I'm still getting anxiety and nervous because it's like all of that I'm forgetting. So they really had a responsibility to remind viewers that, and they did not. And so I think that's what enabled these narratives as well to take hold, because in that vacuum of information that was exploited by people on the far right to say, oh, look, they stopped the counting and now all these new votes are coming in, and look at how the vote counts are changing. Why? And I've heard people say, well, why didn't they just, finish counting the votes on election night? Why did it extend out this far? Well, because this isn't news per se, but it should have been the network's responsibility to remind us why, and it could have been a teachable moment, and they just totally mess that up.
Yeah.
If you could go back to yourself and say, just wait 48 hours, don't watch any news, would you?
Oh, absolutely. I would not have watched on election night. That was my biggest regret.
Roller coaster.
Well, and you didn't learn anything either. I mean, it was the same. So for those of us who watched, it started off very similar to 2016. Florida results start coming in, and there's all the speculation. Oh, it looks good for Biden, and then it turns bad. And then, and then these other states are just hanging out there with lopsided vote counts for Trump. And there were not enough reminders at all about how much of the vote was outstanding. And so it was nerve-wracking. And, I didn't go to bed till 2 a.m. And then next day when all the vote counts had changed, I was thinking, why did I even stay up that late? It was pointless.
Yeah.
I imagine Brandon's basement with like 4 TVs tuned to different channels.
Command center style.
Multiple monitors. Yeah, I got the whole thing.
Yeah.
Oh.
What was your election night?
My election night was sitting on the couch with a beer watching either NPR, Fox, or CNN. I did switch around.
Yeah. And I've never really asked you, but I think Brandon and I both agree that the media is just finding new ways to clown itself and just sell off its credibility one ridiculous story at a time. Where do you generally stand on the media?
Well, that's the problem today. Nobody has a source that they can think is neutral and unbiased. And I mean, if we put on rose-colored glasses and take a nostalgic view to 30 years ago, where there were 3 sources of news, and you got to pick one trusted senior news editorialist each night, and you'd learn from your news that evening on the TV at 6 p.m., and all your neighbors got the exact same message and heard the same statistics and heard the same direction. Now, it's so fractured, you can look at 50 different sources, get 50 different stories, and you'll believe what you want to believe. And there's no commonality there for us to judge the events together.
Good old
Which
Walter
model's
Cronkite.
better
But we're
to you,
also
JB?
fractured. Yeah. Well, and the silos too, JB, if you could speak to that, the fact that it would be one thing if we had all these sources and people bounced around and at least, started looked at multiple sources and came to a perspective. But there's so many people that just focus on one or a handful of sources. And then that's how these separate spheres of reality come about.
Well, and there's a competing interest. Why deliver exactly balanced, fair news if it doesn't drive ratings?
Well, you could watch the Fox News coverage on election night, and there were parts where they were obviously in pain. They did not like some of the results. They did everything they could, I think, to project that Trump was still going to win the election. And I think they did it just for ratings. To your point, elections now are going to be a 4-day event until we know who won. That's a ratings bonanza that why would you end that? Why would you call the election on Friday when we all knew where it was going, when you've got the entire country focused in on you? What's the answer to media coverage in elections, Brandon? Is there anything that can be done?
No. Media is a for-profit enterprise, and so they will continue to milk what they can and elongate the process. And what was frustrating to me is you had these days play out when we got very little updates and vote counts, and during that time, the networks like CNN and Fox managed to fill that time with all of this speculation, and a lot of it was regurgitated like over and over again. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is pointless. How many times are they going to say the same thing that we already know?
How many times can Wolf Blitzer tell you a stat that you just heard last hour of something that hasn't changed?
Yeah, but I would probably throw that question, JB. What do you think about the media landscape? I don't know that it's going to change fast enough. Clearly it's not there to teach, which is a frustration of mine, but where does the media go from here if this is a new normal?
Well, the new normal seems to be a lot of change of moving off of traditional media to social networking too, right? And I think one of the most interesting stories that's come around this week is looking at what percentage of the population do you suppose got their news last week from Twitter or Facebook? Now, there's a lot of viewers and readers who went to those sites and just saw a little bubble label at the top that said, maybe this isn't factual, maybe this hasn't been researched. And they took that as censorship. And so the solution to that is there's a significant part of that readership that is now moving off of those platforms and onto their own carved out. If you look at the top charts of the Apple iOS store right now, there's an application called Parler, which is labeled as a conservative social media outlet. Yeah. And there's an alternative video view on there and an alternative Twitter view on there. And you can go get these applications, and now you've moved with a group of people who believed exactly what you believed, didn't believe exactly what you didn't believe, and now you've isolated yourself further. I don't know. To me, it's getting worse. It's going to encourage more polarization because now we're not even debating with each other on the same platform of social media. Now we've split off. If you're not making an argument to anybody who disagrees with you, what's the point of making it?
But let me push back on this a little bit. Is it better to go to a place to get your news where they state their biases up front and you know what you're getting into, or to watch something like CNN that still presents itself as down the middle news, knowing that they are as biased as anything you're going to see on that Parler app?
Do any of these give you their bias up front?
Yeah, I think so. What you just read with Parler. Parler just said we're a conservative. If you listen to Ben Shapiro every day, Ben Shapiro starts almost every show. This is not a news show. This is an opinion show. I am a conservative, and I embrace my biases, and I bring them to the table. The difference is I'm going to tell you that you're getting a bias slant. Is it better to hang out where at least everybody's being honest about how biased they are, or to watch a mainstream news program like MSNBC or CNN where you have to kind of play along with the charade a little bit that this is mainstream Walter Cronkite style news?
Points for honesty, but now you're in an echo chamber.
True.
And it's going to go downhill fast.
A complete echo chamber. Facebook and some of the big platforms to some degree become echo chambers because of the algorithms serving you content that you're more likely to respond to. But these are 100% echo chambers, and every outlet has a bias. Every platform has a bias of some type, whether it's subtle or it's more direct. But I think the difference differences between bias and just, presenting misinformation as fact. Like, I mean, there are some of these sites that peddle and spread conspiracies that have no basis in fact and present them as the truth. And so there isn't anybody who can call that out. Who's going to be the arbiter or the independent objectivist to say this is blatantly false?
Yeah.
There isn't going to be that person. And so it's human nature when you hear something over and over and over again, and then your friends on Parler are repeating it over and over and over again, eventually that becomes reality. I mean, I think natural defenses in terms of being able to question and your logical instincts go by the wayside.
This is a good point. Those sites kind of break down your ability to think critically. And after a while, you've been beat on so much with the same piece of information, you just kind of give in and go along with it.
And Parler specifically, has put itself out there. It's been around since 2018, but obviously has floundered until now. But it puts themselves out there as this paragon of free speech, but they have booted users who don't completely conform to the right side of what they're spewing. So they, are just as bad as many of the other players in terms of regulating speech, if not worse, when it comes to their own platform.
Well, that used to be Twitter and Facebook's message. We're not the arbiters of truth. We're not going to editorialize here. And there are a few lawsuits away from having to do that. And I imagine that is a future destiny of Parler and these other applications too. As soon as it gets some really nasty stuff on there and somebody raises a lawsuit, they're not going to go out of business. They'll find a way to filter that.
Yeah.
Well, then how do you choose what to filter? Now you're the arbiter.
So Mike and I have debated this a lot. I am old enough to remember when Walter Cronkite just read the news 5 days a week. And it was awesome. For 30 minutes, you sat down. This old white guy got on TV. He read the news to you. Nobody accepted that this was the absolute single source of truth. And everybody went about their business. The news was something that was 30 minutes a day. Then you might watch the local news, but local news got wonky all the time. And that's what it was. I have argued with Mike, what's wrong with that? Let me rephrase. I know what's wrong with it, but is if what we've had today better? Is it serving our needs better, what we have today, other than one lonely white man reading news to you?
Well, you nailed it. It's the one middle-aged white guy giving everybody the news, his version of the news, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
The alternative that we see today seems terrible because it's completely fractured. And it's hard to tell what's truth and what's fiction. There's got to be something in the middle there, and most people won't pay for it, right? So now you're chasing advertising dollars and eyeballs.
Yeah. The School of Rock kids have calmed down. Did anybody recognize the song they were playing?
They had a good beat. I couldn't detect.
You didn't pick it up?
I didn't pick it up.
That was Smooth Criminal.
Oh.
Yeah. That must be the advanced kids, because I mean they were rocking the hell out of that song.
I should have gotten that.
So while we end our bash with the media, this election fiasco has given us one thing, Brandon, and that is possibly the greatest press conference in the history of all political press conferences. Of course, I'm talking about Four Seasons Total Landscaping.
I just want to know who booked that and who made the mistake when, the thought was that was going to be the Four Seasons Hotel. And then it's at this like little landscaping place, like just in the middle of nowhere. Looks like something off of like a
Brandon,
movie set
middle of nowhere. It's next to Fantasyland Erotica Books
and a crematorium.
And the crematorium. I mean,
you can't get better than that.
The foot traffic through there on a Saturday has got to be pretty significant, I would think.
The crane shot picture of the people in a little parking lot. That's unbelievable.
If you want to entertain yourself, go on, I think it's Yelp or Google reviews, and read the reviews of the Fantasyland Erotica shop. They have some very strong opinions on things that I didn't know people thought that strongly about. But to your point, is there any other way to look at that than just a complete amateur hour sideshow, ridiculous? What is there any takeaway we can take actually from that press conference?
No. Well, I think it shows that they didn't have any substance to these claims, right? This was just by the seat of their pants, get a press conference together, provide the perception that, we are fighting, this fraudulent rigged election. But really that symbolized everything, right? Because this was, if you get behind the veneer, there's nothing there. Yeah. I mean, it's pathetic. And I think the backdrop was pathetic, and then the accusations themselves are baseless and pathetic.
Visual metaphor for the state of our administration.
Exactly.
When Rudy Giuliani is your lead attorney, you have problems. My wife
Has there been anybody that's fallen as much as Rudy? I mean, that is
so respected at 9/11.
Yeah.
And then,
this Rudy is an example of one of my core tenets: know when to walk away.
Yeah.
Know when you're as good as you're ever going to be, and you're only going to screw the pooch from here. And Rudy just missed that window because he just could not walk away from it. JP, a consistent thing I've talked about is I'm so tired of old people. I'm tired of, and I am old. I am so tired of every time I turn on the TV, it seems somebody in their 70s in some sort of position of power that just simply will not let the brass ring go. How do we, is there any way to break that? Or is it just, we just have to, I guess, let nature take its course? But where's all the real smart 40-year-olds that want to run stop something?
Brandon's generation needs to step up because
here we go.
Ours passed the buck. We need to mobilize the youth, and we need to get somebody younger in there. You'll have to elect people in who are willing to do term limits. That's the only way it's going to change.
Yeah, because I mean, and young people are trying, but I mean, there are systemic roadblocks, in terms of being able to, the powers of incumbency and those that have been in these positions a long time don't give up power easily, as you can see, and money, the nominating system. There's so much it works against these young people who are trying to step up. Those who tend to vote more than those who do not. Those who are older and tend to vote for older people. So there's all of these things, but yeah, there's plenty of young people, and we've seen them. I would argue that, during the Democratic primaries, I mean, Pete Buttigieg was a great example of someone who's smart, who's capable, who can, really
just needs more name recognition.
More name recognition. So it'll come in time, but yeah, I mean, it
seems so foundational and not many people talk about it. You have to reboot how long these people can stay there before you can really affect change. Then you can start to slowly bring in more people over time that have,
I mean, you have Dianne Feinstein,
opinions.
who's what,
86.
86. I mean, Nancy
Pelosi's 80.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
I've said this before. My father, I think, is 78. I love my father. You don't want him running shit. It's just, you hit a certain age where mentally, and I'm not trying to take a dig at Biden. It's just the natural, it's nature running its course. Plus two, Trump was the perfect example, and I try to explain this to younger people who I work with, that if you think old man Whitey's just going to lay down and let you run over him and take his power away, you're going to have to pry it out of our cold, dead hand. And Trump's presidency was just an exercise of, I'll do anything to hold on to power just for power's sake. Is that just what politics is now? I mean, why would a 45-year-old be any different? If the game's power, then you could be 78, 48, 38. It really doesn't matter.
How much of it is you have to be willing to reach out there and grab it, and younger, below 50, you're too worried about family, school, job, whatever, and you're not going to serve. You're not going to go run for office. It costs too much money. It takes too much time. You don't want your background looked at.
Brandon, I think you're the only one here that I think would consider running for office at some time in the future. Yeah. Is that something you're still thinking about, or do you just reach a point where you're like, why would I do that to myself?
I mean, it is. I'm glad I'm not serving right now or have run, because I think this is a toxic time right now. So I'm waiting for this era to pass. But as somebody who has served in office, even on the local level, having served in city council, I mean, it is. It's difficult. I mean, you are running up against, a machine and an infrastructure that's really geared
even
towards,
at that level. You're fighting uphill.
I mean, because we like to say that the mechanisms favor those who are older, particularly like in Congress and federal level, but even on the local level. I mean, in many suburbs, places across the country, there's this like good old boys club type of atmosphere, which relies on, John, has, been with us for 50 years and he served here and he was on this commission, did this. And so you can break into that when you're young, but sometimes it's hard to break in and hit the ground running because there's this expectation of you need to wait your turn. Yeah. And it's like, well, if I wait my turn, then I'm going to be like 80. Like, no, I don't want to wait till I'm 80. I want to do this now. And so, it's a challenge. And I think that young people have to just step up. They have to be bold. I mean, they have to just kind of insert themselves in, even if it's uncomfortable because again, in some of these aspects in terms of getting ingratiated to the organizations and the power structures that allow you to rise up, you're not going to be invited in. And I've told this to many people, like, you just have to kind of push down the door and walk in and say, I'm here. Some people will like you, some won't. You have to accept that. Not everybody's going to like you, and just, full steam ahead. Because the fact is, some of these organizations and structures just aren't welcoming to new blood or to younger people.
Is this a good use case of federal dollars? If campaign finance reform actually happened and you could encourage and fund younger candidates, a 30-year-old's not even going to think about how much money it takes to run for something like this. If there were either caps on what was required or there was some sort of federal assistance, is that the right use of dollars there?
Well, and apparently it takes $70 million to run for the Senate.
It's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, $14 billion spent this year across federal elections compared to $5 billion in 2016.
Think of what that money could do.
Jeez.
But yeah, exactly. But other countries have figured this out, right? I mean, if you look at Europe and if you look at Canada, they have public financing, they have limitations on money and politics, big money. And many of these countries have elected younger leaders and have a much younger parliament, much younger legislative bodies than we do. We've gone the opposite direction. So what's interesting is that our allies in the Western world have
they're getting younger.
Bodies are getting younger, and we're getting older. I mean, we have the oldest Congress that we've had in like 50 years. And so it's incredible to me that we're moving in the opposite direction of where we were 30, 40, 50 years ago. But it goes back to, I think, exactly what you're saying, money in politics. If that could be solved, that would open the doors to more people and remove some of those barriers.
You guys follow local politics better. Do you see any change there locally? If you look at the school board district or the water board or city council, does the age shift downward there?
I don't see that.
No, I mean, there's exceptions. I see anomalies every now and then where a young person breaks in, but as a whole, not as much. There's a better ability to do it on local level, right? Because it's less expensive. You don't have to spend 2 years running for a local office like you would for, Congress or federal. So there is an opportunity there. And I think it's more so about just educating voters young people on what to do and how to do it. And so, I mean, part of it is too, you personal initiative is involved. And then also just kind of breaking down those doors.
To your point, no one's going to say, please, 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 we're recruiting young candidates. Come over here and we'll give you all the money and back you.
Not going to happen.
You're going to have to find that yourself. Jason, our last topic is we seem to be Democrats I'm talking to seem to think that there's still an opportunity to take the Senate with these two elections in Georgia. I am highly skeptical of that. What's your thoughts on the Georgia Senate races?
I'm highly skeptical as well. Obviously, they're very close, but to get everybody to come out and vote again when the president's not on the ballot, to do it in the winter months, to do it when COVID's probably spiking, the deck is stacked against it. And really more need to come out on one end or the other to flip it. And even if the Democrats win 2 more seats, it's still tied. And now you're looking at the vice president being the tiebreaker. It's not a good situation there.
Yeah.
I mean, I disagree a little bit. I understand what you're saying, and I would say that is a challenge for the Democrats, but I think it's a challenge for the Republican side too, more so than it has been in the past, because the base is so firmly tied to Trump, and he's the factor that gets them to turn out. Don't forget that, Democrats were able to largely win in 2018 because they didn't have Trump at the top of the ballot, and they were able to, take back the House. This year, with Trump on the ballot, they actually lost seats in the House while still retaining their majority. So not having Trump on the ballot in January is huge for Democrats.
Wind out of the sails there for Trump supporters, you think?
Any what?
Is the wind out of the sails for Trump supporters?
I think so, because then you also have the aspect of many of them who think this last election was fraudulent. So if they are feeling demoralized and they think the process itself is rigged and corrupt, you have to push back against that narrative if you're the senators, the incumbents, and say, no, it's not as corrupt as you think. You really should, get out and support me. And so those are two negative things that are really going to hamper turnout among Trump's base.
These two are going to spend 2 months taking a big, huge dump on the election that just happened. Calling it fraudulent, calling it stolen, calling it rigged. And they're going to ask those exact same people to go out and vote again when Trump's not on the ticket. To your point, JP, COVID, the weather. I mean, this might be the first kind of, hey guys, all of this rigged talk is going to have some consequences. It's possible those two Republican Senate candidates may be the first two to see those.
I think so too. And that's why I'm not calling it either way, because I I think it's so unpredictable because, I mean, January 5th, coming right after the holidays and New Year's, it's anybody's guess as to what that turnout model actually looks like.
What poll are you going to look at, Brandon, to give you some insight into this
I am not going
election?
to look at any polls into this election. I mean, particularly after what we've seen and the fact that, I mean, any polls on a special election, like, no thanks, not biting.
Do you think the importance of those seats resonates with the common voter there in Georgia and might be its own driver to get them to go to the poll?
And some it will. I think that for one of the races, it's helpful that there is a charismatic, popular African-American pastor, which I think will make a difference in being able to turn out the black vote. I do think it would be more difficult for Democrats not having an African-American on the ballot who could energize that portion of the base.
Which they do.
They do.
Warwick is,
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. It's great for them that they have
pastor, African-American. He's a great candidate.
I mean, if the Democrats just had two white guys for both seats, I'd say it's done and over.
Yeah. So we made it through all three topics. This is 3 people on mic. I got to admit, that was a lot better than I thought we were going to do tonight. So now, as long as I don't delete this when I'm posting it, I think our first podcast of this new format went better than I thought.
You'll find you have 60 minutes of silence recorded.
60 minutes of silence, or all I get on loop
worst.
is the band playing or something like that. So we typically end these just talking about what TV are we consuming, just something to kind of a palate cleanser to what is going on in the country right now. So we'll let you start, Jason. What entertainment is kind of catching your eye right now?
So you guys have talked about The Mandalorian on Disney Plus before, but another show on the same channel.
Are you going Star Wars the first night?
No.
Okay.
The Right Stuff. The Right Stuff.
Yeah, the movie.
Book became a movie.
Yeah.
Now it's a series. It's really excellent. The acting's excellent. The scripting's excellent. And they're trickling it out episode by episode, which Craig, I know how you feel about that.
I hate that shit. Hate that.
Into it by now, but it's very entertaining. Probably not great for the family. So,
but
maybe
also too
high PG-13 there.
Does it that movie makes you feel good about America?
Yes.
Does the series do the same thing?
Yes.
Okay, I'm in. I don't need anything else than that.
I need to check that out because I'm ready for something feel good at this point.
Are you watching anything, Brandon?
I just started watching Ted Lasso on Apple TV. It's Jason Sudeikis. Yeah.
Is that good?
It is good so far. And I love the Kansas City references. So it's a good distraction.
Man, I've been like the king of Netflix, and so I'm not watching anything. So I don't know what I'm doing. I got to pick something up.
Apple for $4 a month, you can get quite a few good shows right now.
Yeah, we have Apple TV too. We just haven't looked at it.
Free for a year if you bought something.
Did you watch that Tom Hanks movie, The Hunter?
Yeah,
that was pretty good.
That was
pretty good.
And they also have the morning show.
Oh, the morning show was so good. Oh, yeah. I love that one.
Another space race one, an alternative history that shows women becoming the first astronauts is on that channel too. I'm trying to remember the name.
Oh, I know which one you're talking about. I haven't seen it though yet.
Yeah, I won't think of it on mic, but that's really good.
Hey, astronauts, America, you can't go wrong.
Feel good.
Yeah,
feel good.
Back when we could all collaborate and get something done, and
you
nostalgia.
can't hate an astronaut, right? You can't. Nobody can ever hate an astronaut. That's our hour. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to 2 Men in the Middle. Make sure to give us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. Check out our website at 2meninthemiddle.com. Drop us an email at 2meninthemiddle@gmail.com or tweet at us at 2 Men in the Middle. We'll see you next week.